Every summer, millions of Americans dive into lakes and rivers to escape the heat. But what if I told you that in just a single breath of water, something invisible could crawl inside your body and begin eating your brain alive? This isn't science fiction, it's real. It's called the brain-eating amoeba. 97% of those infected never make it out alive. And just weeks ago, in Missouri's Lake of the Ozarks, a young man went from water skiing with friends to fighting for his life in a hospital bed. As doctors raced against a killer they could barely understand, this is the terrifying story of the parasite that turned summer fun into a death sentence. The sun over Missouri's Lake of the Ozarks hung heavy, pouring its gold across the restless waters. Speedboats carved sharp white lines into the surface, their echoes bouncing off the surrounding bluffs. Families crowded the shoreline, children laughing as they splashed in the shallows, while further out, young men raced across the lake on skis. Among them was 24-year-old Daniel Myers. Daniel had grown up near these waters. He called it his second home, a place of freedom, where every summer since childhood had been marked with fishing, swimming, or skiing. His friends often joked that if you cut him open, lake water would pour out instead of blood. On this particular afternoon, Daniel was full of life. His laugh carried across the lake as he tightened the strap of his life vest, pulled the ski rope taut, and signaled for the boat to accelerate. The water roared around him. Spray hit his face, the sun blinding in flashes as he cut across the wake. Each movement was practiced, perfected through years of familiarity. He leaned into the turns, feeling the rush of wind on his skin, the exhilarating pull of the rope. From the shoreline, he looked untouchable, another young man, fearless and free, in the height of his strength. That no one knew that in those moments, as water surged through his nose and into his sinuses, something microscopic had entered his body. Something ancient, invisible, and merciless. A single-celled organism dwelling silently in the warmth of the lake, waiting. That evening, Daniel returned home sunburned, sore and tired, but happy. His mother remembered the grin he wore when he walked through the door, dropping his damp gear in the hallway. He devoured dinner, joking about racing his friends again the next day. It was the picture of normalcy, the ending to countless summer days before. But within hours, small cracks began to appear. First came the headache. He brushed it off: heat stroke, dehydration, maybe too much sun. He drank water, took aspirin, and stretched out on the couch. By midnight, though, the headache sharpened, joined by a fever that had his skin burning. His mother checked on him, found him sweating, his face pale, eyes glassy. She urged him to let her drive him to urgent care. Daniel refused, insisting it was just exhaustion. He laughed weakly, but it was hollowed out by gone. His laughter was gone. He woke disoriented, muttering nonsense. His once strong body seemed drained, as if the life inside him was being quietly stolen. Alarmed, his parents rushed him to the emergency room. Nurses surrounded him, asking questions he could barely answer. He winced at the bright lights, recoiled at the pain slicing through his head. The doctors at first suspected meningitis. They ordered scans, tests, spinal fluid samples. But something was off. His condition worsened at a terrifying pace. Within hours of arrival, Daniel was convulsing, his body racked with seizures. His parents stood helplessly at his bedside, as parents stood helplessly at his parents stood helplessly at his bedside. Alarms sounded, machines beeped, and the team fought to stabilize him. And then, the word surfaced. A rare possibility, a nightmare whispered in medical journals more than in hospitals. Naegleria, Fowleri. The brain-eating amoeba. The words felt unreal, even to the doctors. Few in the world had ever seen such a case firsthand. But for Daniel and his family, it was no longer a distant medical curiosity. It was a predator inside his skull, feeding, spreading, destroying. By the time the diagnosis was confirmed, Daniel was already slipping away. The Lake of the Ozarks had always been a jewel of Missouri. On holiday weekends, its waters churned with thousands of boats, music thumping from floating bars, families grilling by the shore. But beneath the sunshine and the laughter, the lake kept secrets. Locals told hushed stories of drownings, of shadows moving beneath the waves at night. To most, they were just campfire tales. To Daniel Myers, it was simply home. In the weeks before his illness, the lake had been unusually warm. The summer heat baked the region mercilessly, raising the water temperature to levels most swimmers didn't think twice about. But for something microscopic, something lurking in the silt, in the still, shallow coves, it was the perfect breeding ground. Daniel's water skiing trip had taken him across one such cove. His friends later recalled how he wiped out, face first, vanishing under the surface for several seconds, before clambering back onto his skis, coughing and laughing it off. No one thought that in those seconds, water had rushed into his nose, carrying with it a parasite that would change everything. Doctors would later explain that Naegleria Fowleri travels in a straight line once inside the human body. It doesn't linger in the sinuses, it doesn't give warnings. It drives upward through delicate tissue, breaking past barriers, moving directly into the brain. There, it begins to feed, not slowly, not mercifully, but with violent efficiency. For Daniel, the signs had already begun. His fever rose past 104 degrees, his eyes bloodshot, his head pounding with pressure that painkillers couldn't touch. By the second day, he was screaming in agony, clutching his skull as if trying to hold it together. His family's confusion turned to panic. This wasn't flu. This wasn't exhaustion. This was something else. Something no one understood. At the hospital, nurses whispered in corners. A spinal tap revealed blood mixed with cerebrospinal fluid, an ominous sign. Cultures were rushed to the lab. As the hours crawled by, Daniel's condition deteriorated. He grew violent, thrashing against restraints, shouting at visions only he could see. "Get them out of my head!" he cried, his voice raw with terror. The staff had seen meningitis, encephalitis, viral fevers, but this was different. The speed of destruction was terrifying. What normally took weeks in other infections was happening in hours. Then came the word no family ever expects to hear. "We think it's the brain-eating amoeba." The doctors' faces were grave. In the history of the United States, fewer than a handful had survived it. 97% of patients were dead within days of symptoms. For Daniel's mother, the words shattered the world. She collapsed in the waiting room, sobbing, begging doctors to do something, anything. But the truth was brutal. There was no guaranteed cure. And as the sun set over Lake of the Ozarks that night, locals who had spent the day in its waters laughed, grilled, drank, and danced, never realizing the monster that lived silently beneath them, waiting for its next victim. By the third day, Daniel Myers was no longer himself. The boy who had been laughing on the lake just 48 hours earlier was now lying on a hospital bed, drenched in sweat, his lips cracked, his eyes glazed with pain. His once athletic body convulsed uncontrollably, as if trying to fight an enemy no one could see. His parents stood by, helpless. His mother clutched his hand, whispering prayers, while his father demanded answers from every doctor who walked through the door. But there were no answers. Only theories. The doctors first suspected bacterial meningitis, a deadly but treatable infection. They started him on antibiotics, fluids, cooling blankets to bring down the fever, but nothing worked. Within hours, his condition spiraled further out of control. Then came the seizures. Nurses rushed in as alarms blared. Daniel's body arched violently, his eyes rolling back, foam collecting at his mouth. His mother screamed, shoved out of the way as staff worked furiously to keep him alive. Tubes were inserted, IVs doubled, machines whirred, monitors beeped a deadly rhythm. But even As they stabilized him, one truth became undeniable. This wasn't meningitis. Something else was happening. Something far worse. A spinal tap brought the answer. Fluid. So clouded and blood-stained that even the seasoned doctor who withdrew it muttered under his breath, "Oh my God." By now, Daniel was barely conscious. He groaned, mumbled incoherent. Words clawed at his head as if trying to rip something out. He whispered things that made no sense. About burning, about drowning, about shadows crawling inside his brain. For his parents, it was unbearable. Their son was slipping away before their eyes, and no one could explain why, but the infection knew exactly what it was doing. Inside Daniel's skull, Naegleria Fowleri was already attacking, tearing through brain tissue, consuming neurons, leaving destruction in its wake. The parasite wasn't just killing him. It was eating him alive. By the time the CDC confirmed the diagnosis, it was almost too late. The words echoed in the sterile hospital corridor like a death sentence. Brain-eating amoeba. Fatal in 97% of cases. Daniel's father punched the wall until his knuckles split. His mother collapsed into a chair, unable to breathe. This wasn't just an illness. This was a nightmare, and it was real. And in Missouri, in the heat of that summer, thousands of people were still swimming in the same lake, completely unaware of the silent killer waiting just beneath the surface. For days, Daniel's family had lived in the sterile corridors of the hospital, pacing, praying, bargaining with God. But nothing prepared them for the moment the doctor finally spoke the words aloud. Naegleria Fowleri, he said quietly. The brain-eating amoeba. The words sounded like science fiction. A monster you'd expect in a horror movie, not in real life. But this was no invention. This was nature at its most merciless. The parasite is smaller than a grain of dust. Invisible, silent. And yet, once it enters the human body, it unleashes a destruction more terrifying than any serial killer. It doesn't swim through your veins. It doesn't linger in your stomach. No, it takes the fastest route to the most precious organ. The brain. Doctors explained that Naegleria thrives in warm, fresh water, lakes, rivers, even poorly treated swimming pools. When water is forced up the nose, the amoeba seizes its chance. It burrows through delicate nasal tissue, hitching a ride along the olfactory nerves, straight into the brain, and once there, it begins to feed. Not gently, not slowly, but violently, tearing through brain matter cell by cell, leaving nothing but destruction in its path. Patients first feel headaches, nausea, fever, then confusion, hallucinations, seizures, coma, death, all within days. In the United States, it happens almost every summer. A child jumps into a lake, a teenager dunks their head underwater, a family splashes in a warm river, and within a week, one of them is gone. Doctors call it PAM, primary amoebic meningoencephalus, a name too clinical, too sterile for the horror it represents. Because in reality, it's a death sentence. Only 4 people in U.S. history have ever survived it. 4. The rest, dozens of bright, young lives ended in hospitals just like Daniel's, their families left with nothing but memories, their names buried in quiet CDC reports. The news of Daniel's condition spread quickly through Missouri. Headlines screamed of the brain-eating amoeba. Local parents pulled their kids from the water. Swimmers vanished from the coves. A lake that once echoed with music and laughter was suddenly silent, its surface shimmering under the summer sun hiding the terror beneath. For Daniel's family, the silence was even heavier. Every beep of the hospital monitor, every shallow breath, every whispered word from the doctors carried the weight of a nightmare they could not wake from. And across America, millions watched the news, horrified, and began asking themselves the same chilling question. If this parasite lives in our lakes, could it be waiting for me? The news broke on a humid August evening. Missouri man fights for life after contracting brain-eating amoeba. The anchor's voice declared her expression caught between professionalism and fear. Within hours, it was everywhere. CNN, Fox News, local stations, social media. Hashtags spread like wildfire. Hashtag brain-eating amoeba. Parents across the country stared at their television screens in horror. It wasn't overseas. It wasn't in some distant country with poor sanitation. It was here, America, a lake thousands of families swam in every summer. The words were chilling. 97% fatality rate. Almost no survivors. No guaranteed cure. The Centers for Disease Control rushed to issue statements, trying to calm the public. They explained that cases were extremely rare, only a handful each year, but their reassurances fell flat. Because no one cared about the numbers. They cared about the image of a healthy young man, vibrant and strong, now lying in a hospital. Bet as something invisible devoured his brain. Local stores saw a sudden rush for bottled water. Swimming holes that had been packed just days earlier stood empty. Tourists canceled trips to Missouri. Even in Florida and Texas, hundreds of miles away, families pulled their children from pools, whispering about amoebas lurking in the pipes. Talk shows invited doctors who spoke in grave tones about how the amoeba enters through the nose, about how quickly it kills. Hosts leaned forward, wide-eyed, as if they too couldn't quite believe this was real. On YouTube, conspiracy theorists uploaded frantic videos. Is the government hiding the truth about amoeba infections? Don't drink the water. Parasites are among us. The panic was spreading faster than the parasite itself. At Lake of the Ozarks, businesses that thrived on summer crowds suddenly collapsed into silence. The docks were empty, rental boats sat idle, and lifeguards patrolled beaches with nothing to guard but stillness. And yet, beneath the surface, the water remained the same, calm, glittering, beautiful, hiding its invisible predator. Inside the hospital, Daniel's fight became a symbol. Strangers sent letters, prayers, donations. News vans lined the streets outside, cameras flashing whenever doctors emerged with updates. His name was now known far beyond Missouri, a young man unknowingly carrying the weight of a nation's fear. And still, the question haunted every household in America. If it could happen to him, why not us? The truth about the brain-eating amoeba is more terrifying than fiction, because the parasite isn't limited to one lake in Missouri. It's been found across the United States, Florida, Texas, Louisiana, even as far north as Minnesota. Wherever summer heat turns lakes into warm, shallow pools, Naegleria fowleri can live, and that means it could be waiting. For anyone, imagine this. You dive into a swimming hole, laughing as cool water rushes over your face. You hold your breath, plunge beneath the surface, and come up gasping with water dripping down your nose. A normal, innocent summer moment, but that's all it takes. One forceful rush of water up the nostrils. One invisible passenger riding straight to the brain. For years, families assumed it was rare enough not to matter. But doctors know the truth. It is rare. Until it isn't. Until it happens to your child, your spouse, your friend. Consider the numbers. Since the 1960s, only a few hundred cases have been documented in the United States. But the survival rate? Just 4 survivors. 4. Everyone else, gone within days. The symptoms start mild. A headache, fever, stiff neck. Then the spiral begins. Confusion, seizures, hallucinations, coma. By the time doctors even think to test for the amoeba, it's already too late. That's the cruelest part. You don't know you're infected until death is already at the door. And prevention? There's no vaccine, no easy cure. The only defense is awareness. Doctors warn, avoid swimming in warm, still fresh water during heat waves. Never force water up your nose in lakes, rivers, or poorly treated pools. Use sterile or boiled water in neti pots, not tap. Simple steps. small choices. But for some, the difference between life and death. As America panicked, thousands asked themselves, would I even know if I had it? Could it already be inside me? And for the families who had already lived the nightmare, the advice came too late. By the end of the week, Daniel Myers was unrecognizable. The strong young man who had once carved across the waves of Lake of the Ozarks now lay motionless beneath a web of machines. Tubes snaked down his throat. His chest rose and fell only because a ventilator forced it to. His skin was pale, his lips cracked, his once bright eyes hidden beneath swollen lids. Doctors crowded around his bed, whispering in low, urgent tones. They had tried everything: powerful antifungal drugs, induced hypothermia to slow the parasite, experimental treatments brought in from across the country. But still, the amoeba advanced. Every scan showed the same thing. His brain tissue, once alive with electrical signals, was being eaten away, cell by cell, replaced by shadows. His parents refused to leave his side. His mother pressed a trembling hand to his arm, whispering, "Fight, baby, please fight." His father stared at the monitors, the jagged green lines, as if sheer willpower could keep them steady. At night, the hospital halls echoed with silence, broken only by the faint hiss of oxygen. Nurses moved softly, their eyes avoiding the families, as if they already knew the truth no one wanted to say out loud. And then, one evening, Daniel stirred. It was brief, a flicker of movement in his fingers, a twitch of his eyelids. His mother gasped, clutching his hand. "Daniel? Daniel, can you hear me?" For a moment, it seemed as if he might return. His lips moved. A sound escaped, hoarse and broken. One word barely audible: "Help." Tears streamed down her face. She begged the doctors to do something, anything. But the truth was merciless. They were fighting an enemy no one had ever truly beaten. By dawn, Daniel was slipping again. Seizures, racking his body, the machine screaming in protest. Doctors rushed in, pushing drugs, adjusting tubes, shocking his chest. For hours, the room was chaos, a battlefield where science and death clashed in brutal silence. And then, silence won. The monitors flattened. The relentless beeping stopped. The room fell quiet. Daniel Myers was gone. Another victim of the brain-eating amoeba. Another name added to a list no family ever wants to join. Outside, the sun rose over Lake of the Ozarks, casting its golden light across the still glittering waters. Boats glided, children laughed, families played, unaware of the invisible killer beneath. Patient as ever, and as America absorbed the news, one question echoed louder than all others: if this parasite lives in our lakes, our rivers, even our pools, how long before it strikes again?